Welcome. I know that you've been reading The Atlantic, Emily Oster's little op-ed piece saying that we should all now carry on. We should move on and recognize that I don't even think she said mistakes were made. She just said, bless her heart, because I kind of looked her up on Wikipedia and she is a youngin'. She's a youngin', so maybe we can forgive her for. I think she's 42 now. So does that count as millennial? I don't know. We Gen Xers are just so used to being boomed and Z'd and millennialed out, and nobody's paying attention to us. And it's time for us Gen Xers to admit that we knew all along everything, all of this that's been happening. And I could say, how did I know all along back in spring 2020 that indeed we were about to be hit with a giant something or other? Partly because I've been listening to Vox and all of you guys talk on Social Galactic and such, and also because, well, I have, of course, the thing that clearly Professor Oster needs and doesn't have, which is, ooh, look, a crystal ball. Now, if I could simply as a professor of history see into the future so well, was it because I had a crystal ball or because maybe I was thinking about the whole problem differently than she was? We're going to do the archive tonight, check the memes, check the story, and say, in the nicest possible way, we told you so. Welcome to the Mosaic Ark. See, I've got clearly the ability to see into the future because back there, and I can prove it. I can prove it. And to a certain extent on my blog, I knew that back in spring 2020, I would want to have this moment when I could say, yes, I told you so. I saw it coming. It was completely obvious throughout January, February. It was probably, I feel like Vox was starting to already talk about it before that, but it was certainly entirely obvious to me January, February 2020 that something was building to happen. I was teaching in my Eurociv course and we were doing the French Revolution because that's what always happens in the winter quarter of Eurociv. And it just felt like another of those event moments, right? That there's something coming, there's going to be a big event. And so indeed, when everything started playing out with the lockdowns and the 2 weeks to flatten the curve and the masks and we need a vaccine by March or April of 2020, it was so clear that we were in for it. And I can prove it because I'll put all the links on my blog that I was writing at that time. Yeah.
Yeah, we knew.
How did we know? This is so Oster in her Atlantic piece. I did, mildly look her up just a little bit, and she is younger than I expected. I thought she was more like my age, but she's was born in 1980, so maybe she missed a lot. But you're younger than she is. So how did you know?
That's a good question. Third world experience.
Say more.
Well, the brief. So I'm gonna fix my volume. The reflex response in Australia, as it was across the world, was to accept this thing called lockdown as a health intervention policy. And as soon as people started to discuss lockdowns and social distancing, I thought, how is this going to work in East Africa? And then I thought about friends, people that I know that are living there, the conditions that people are living in, and I thought, this is ridiculous. This is impossible. You can't lock down people that are living in the Nairobi slums or on the outskirts of Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, where they're living hand to mouth from day to day. I also found it very curious that the president of Tanzania had immediately suspected that this hypochondriac hysteria was going to be imposed on third world people, and they weren't going to be given the options on how they were going to respond to the health crisis in the most appropriate way for their own population. So that's why I was immediately thinking, okay, something is very, very wrong here.
Mm.
East Africans don't have savings accounts for the most part, and I thought, if there is a woman who's raising 12 children on her own and she's going out to farm seaweed or to work in a cassava fields in order to get enough together to put food in her children's mouths, a lockdown is a death sentence for somebody like this. So I thought, okay, so why is this being recommended as a global solution to infection control? It didn't make any sense for me for that perspective.
I mean, so I'm interested. I teach the French Revolution every couple of years, and there's a kind of arc to the way it's not, hysteria is kind of the wrong word, because there's an arc to the conviction that builds as people get into these moments. And it's interesting with French Revolution because it's another of these cataclysmic overthrows of a society, a social structure that began out of debt. Like the French government cannot pay its debts, and that's why they have to call the Estates General. And it's meant simply to be a reform of the financial system, and it turns into, in the matter of months, right, from May to August, storming of the Bastille and the overthrow of the complete feudal system. The dovecotes are I'm afraid, destroyed in that time, and the things that were happening in 2020 just started feeling like it's one of those moments when every day is going to bring another one of these cascading falls of the house of cards. And I've talked, I think we talked enough about the pharmakeia and the big pharma and my distrust of medicine and such like that, but there was also this, just, I mean, even as we were going in March and it was going to be 2 weeks, I knew it wasn't going to be 2 weeks. I was telling family members, you need to get out of whatever this or that situation you're in, because it's going to be longer than 2 weeks. There's no way that this is simply going to be brief. And the post that I wrote that I'm thinking of in my blog was, one COVID to rule them all, one COVID to find them, one COVID to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. I was also, of course, teaching Tolkien that spring, and it was so clear that this kind of absorption of the world into the fear, one was already wiping out memory. I mean, it's interesting to me reading that post from May 2020, and I'm already talking about how I can't remember what it was like 2 months ago.
Yes.
And sort of, for tonight's stream, we asked, friends in our social media to give us memes, and the memes flooded in. Whatever we do tonight is floating on an ocean of the memes that we selected from. There were more than we were able to put in the slideshow. Well, that we would put in the slideshow. We got a little picky, but this feeling of, wow, it's been 2.5 years. Where did that time go? Where did it's hard to believe it was 2.5 years. I mean, it was not 2 weeks, it was 2 years. I knew from the beginning it was probably going to be at least this long, and yet I'm still surprised that it's been so long.
I feel centuries old now. It doesn't feel like 2 years, it feels like 200.
Well, we've been through this kind of time warp, and this was the other thing with the French Revolution. It's like you go from 1789 to 1794, and 1794 was the terror. I hope we're not in a lull right now, and the terror is still to come. Maybe it is. I mean, the people are starting to die suddenly. Suddenly, and we have had to restructure governments. The governments are being restructured. Although what Marx said famously about history, repeats itself first as tragedy, then as farce. We may be at farce level now, because we're definitely repeating other things that have happened since World War I, and the masking and the vaccinations and the panic that happened in the autumn winter of 1918, and we're also obviously repeating to a certain extent some of the propaganda effects that played out both in World War I and World War II. But the farce level, I mean, that we ended up with mainly memes thus far for this event. But there's still this, you know, you go from 1789 to 1794, and there's this rupture of time, right? We do this as historians, like, oh, you know, after that it's all, you know, different. And it's not, they're not wrong. I mean, there were people that lived through the terror. Not everybody was executed, tens of thousands for sure, but there were people who lived through it, and they find themselves, they're no longer aristocrats, they're no longer you know, have the social status that they did. Napoleon comes in and disturbs everything and rejigs it and rearranges Europe and emancipates the Jews. Yes. And, you know, there's layers and layers already, but just in that the world can change in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, absolutely. It has changed. It has changed here in Australia to a remarkable degree.
What have you noticed? What are you able to notice? This is the problem with if we all have this kind of amnesia, what do we even remember? What have we forgotten that we don't remember anymore?
Well, I've said this before, you know, people here are not even discussing the lockdowns.
Wow.
To me, this is an interesting thing, because for a lot of people, this is quite possibly the most traumatizing thing that's happened to them in their lives. A lot of young people have spent significant percentage of their lives in lockdown in Australia, and yet people are not really discussing it amongst themselves socially. I think there's an incredible pain, and no one wants to touch it. So how it's changed, there is an odd sterility to social interactions now that I find what didn't exist before.
So one, I think you all had, you know, throughout Australia, there are different layers in different states, but you all had a lot more severe lockdowns than I think even, I don't know, California had here. And I think I mean, I can tell on our social media interactions, not everybody, I mean, even you know, we've been talking about this in the Telegram chats for the last few days, people not believing you about what it was like, and saying, oh, you know, following Oster's claim, it's like, oh, we should forgive everyone, mistake, you know, we didn't know.